Professor Schoeb, thank you for the most interesting lecture. And down to Hebrew.
We're going to open the debate on Professor Schoeb's lecture.
Your last remark about working less hour for higher hourly wage reminds me something that you didn't point out. Maybe it's higher productivity or higher exploitation.
Yeah. So there's sometimes the argument made that if we introduce a minimum wage, that might have a positive effect on productivity. I always wonder why this can be the case. The effect should be much, much stronger on a firm level. So if all pay very low wages, and I am the one who increases wages dramatically, then I would expect a very high increase in productivity. This is what Ford did beginning of the 20th century, right? So because then the incentive to work high, to work very productive is very high, because in this firm I get a high wage compared to the wage which I can earn somewhere else. So I can't see why the minimum wage should be here of any help. Did I?
Positions, yeah. Then leave the worker under stress to work more for the same time, for the same hours that are employed.
Yeah, well, so we have no information about whether stress increased, but I guess so the SEP has an innovative panel where they ask many questions about the minimum wage on a personal level. So I think this is something which will definitely be explored, but we have no data so far. I think there are a couple of issues. Even so, I said that the enforcement is quite good. We have to be careful with respect to the mini jobs. Now, first of all, many of these jobs are in small firms. And if you go to the east, there are some firms, let's say there's a small guest house where the neighbors work for 2 or 3 hours a day cleaning the rooms. The owner of the guest house is not a rich person, and the income is low, as is the income of the neighbor. And I think there's a silent agreement to just sign a contract where the hours are fixed, but being clear that one expects to make the same job as before. So I think this is one way to circumvent the problem of rising stress. But I think this is an issue that will be debated, definitely.
Okay.
Shalom.
Shalom.
I'd like to ask 2 questions which are connected to each other. Does the government in Germany have the intention or the will to reach equality between East and West Germany? And the issue of immigrants, not necessarily in the last year, but there are many immigrants in Germany in the last few years in general. Is this data that was taken into account in your research?
First of all, the German government has to establish comparable living conditions all over Germany. This is required by the Constitution. Of course, there's discrimination, or the government can a little bit decide how far it wants to go. There was a debate when introducing the minimum wage whether we should differentiate between the East and the West, but it was not feasible because it was negative discrimination, right? So we would say this is the minimum wage for the West, and for the East they get less, because politically everyone, or particularly in the East, everyone demands the same wage for the same job. irrespectively of the productivity, the ability to sell the products, etc. So, so that's the first case. Second question, sorry.
About the immigrants.
The immigrants, yeah. This is something I haven't mentioned. Of course, I think this will put a long-run problem because the minimum wage will exclude the migrants who came last year, because we know that the skills are very low. It will take quite a lot of time to catch up. Second, we know from the migrants who are there for a longer time that education's level are lower. Our education system is still a system where the equality of opportunities is not very high. So this may have a long-term impact far beyond the direct integration into the labor market about integrating people into society.
I have a problem with your presentation. I'll go back to David Card many years ago, when everyone was convinced that raising the minimum wage would increase unemployment. David Card came out with his research in, I think it was New Jersey, and where New Jersey increased minimum wage, where all the states around it did not increase minimum wage, and he found that employment in New Jersey increased. You find the same thing. Minimum wage increased, employment increased, unemployment went down. Not only that, you find that actually the people who are working are enjoying themselves. They feel better. Now, you also find that people are working less hours. Maybe that's one of the explanations how employment increased. So people are working less. I assume you didn't make any comment about it, that overall incomes didn't go down by 20% like the number of hours worked. So actually people are working less, getting probably decent wages, and they're happy about it, and yet you grumble.
Yes, I grumble.
And you make a kind of a calculation, not a measurement, a calculation about jobs lost. Well, you know, we can calculate according to our ideas a lot of things, but I think basically you come from a position where, had it been your decision, minimum wage wouldn't have gone up. However, it went up. Politicians thought differently, and the results seem quite positive, and I admit they are not very comfortable for economic theory as we know it.
You might not wonder, I completely disagree. Now, the problem is part of what I wanted to, part of the answer I reserved for the symposium discussion later on. But first of all, there's an ongoing empirical debate. Card and Krieger is one example. They found no effects or even some positive effects. If you look at the survey by Neumark and Wascher, you find a completely different setting. My reading of the literature is that we have no clue empirically whether the minimum wage definitely hurts the economy, except for a few parts. For example, youth unemployment in France. Here I'm definitely sure it's about the minimum wage. So here the empirics is not in. The court is not in yet. Second, with respect to theory, now we did some simulations about that, and we said, okay, theory, at least we have two competing theories. The one theory is the classical, neoclassical labor market with labor market flexibility, wages paid according to productivity, marginal productivity, etc. And on the other side, we have the monopsony model, which can be explained by intransparencies of the labor market as well, right? Search models can explain that. So we have taken both into account, and then we looked at, for our simulations, about the monopsony model, what does empirics say? And there we were pretty disappointed. There's hardly anything. except for Card and Krüger. They had, I think it was in the book, says that the maximum markup on the marginal wage is 20%. So if someone has a productivity of €6, the wage might only be €5 for the marginal worker. Okay, so we took that into account when making our simulations, and then it turns out that if someone has a wage increase of 30% or 50% or even 70%, they are not in that type of model anymore. They're back into the classical market, and even for that assumption, we found job losses, and we therefore argued this is a very risky social project we start in an economy where the welfare state has provided some ways to avoid working poor. I'm not very in favor of the Hartz reform. Actually, I disliked it when they were introduced, but I must admit that they were more successful than I have ever expected. But we implemented that in an existing system of industrial relations which worked, and a welfare state which took care of those left behind. We called that a social risky policy. Now, on end of January, the first figures came out, and all the supporters of the minimum wage said, now we have the proof. There is no negative effect. Come on, let's talk about it in 5-6 years. Waiting for the next recession, it will hurt those at the lower bottom of the productivity scale the most. We know that in every recession, they were the one who were excluded. And my guess is, if they're excluded once, they will not return into the labor market when the minimum wage remains high. I was pleading for keeping the minimum wage at its level in 2017 in order to at least have a minor increasing opportunity for the migrants to enter the labor market, rather than taking the 4% wage increase over the whole wage distribution in the last years, and even taking some wage increases which didn't have taken place before the negotiations in the Minimum Wage Commission took place, because the labor market functions well. We will suffer from that, and I will make I will come up with another proposal later on, and what I think is a better policy. And second, my guess is Germany will at least, or in 2 or 3 years' time, follow the French example, which is not a good one, that is subsidizing the minimum wage.